speaker. He has been a longtime member of the ADK Club, and he's the president of the Executive Board. This is Tom Andrews. For 35 years, he's worked on the board as the chairman of the Heart Lake Property Committee. So he's helped make a lot of the changes there and coordinate a lot of volunteers. But tonight, our speaker is Michael Barrett. He is the new Executive Director of the Adirondack Mountain Club. He comes from Missouri. He's changing his life course to come back to New York and work in another direction for the next half of his life. Brought his family, and he's got a lot to tell you about the club. He's new energy and very excited about what we have going on. I'd like you to welcome Michael Barrett.
Hello, everyone. I'll just get all my thoughts and ideas. No, I just need to keep it up.
He does not speak.
So I am at exactly 4 months on the job. And Tom, you joined the Iroquois chapter in 1973, giving you 45 years of experience with the club, bringing our total cumulative experience to 45 years and 4 months of experience. I couldn't ask for a better partner in this endeavor than Tom Andrews. He's got the two components that I need to help guide me in my role. He's got all the credibility in the world with the organization, having been a member since 1973 and been on the Heart Lake Property Planning Committee since 1980 and having ran it as chair for as long as he has. But he also recognizes that unless we make some changes, we're going to become a very stale organization. So those two components is precisely the type of president we need right now. Now, Jill told me that I had an hour. That's absolutely terrifying. Rodney Dangerfield was a comedian for 30 years, and Johnny Carson only gave him 3 minutes. I've been here 4 months, I got an hour. We'll start with a little bit about my background. I am not from Missouri. I am from the lower Hudson Valley. Putnam County is the smallest geographic county in the state, okay? Just north of Westchester, just below Dutchess County. When I graduated high school, I went to school in North Carolina. I have a BA in political science from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. I have a master's degree in foreign languages from the United States Defense Language Institute, Monterey, California. I have a law degree from Southern Illinois University School of Law. Nothing I just said prepared me for this job, nothing. After I graduated law school and finished up about 8 years in the United States Army, I returned home to New York and began work as a public defender in Albany County. What a wonderful job that is. Wonderful job. I couldn't afford to keep it. So I got hired by a man named Elliot Spitzer. He was governor for about a half an hour. Some of you may remember him. I was a criminal justice or public safety advisor for Governor Spitzer. And because his successor, David Paterson, did not have the luxury of a transition period, he kept the same staff as his predecessor, to the delight of my mortgage holder. And so I stayed on with Mr. Paterson as a public safety advisor. And then, about 3 years later, my wife, who is from Missouri, calls me in the Capitol And it's true what they say, you spend long days in the Capitol and you're not always in the best of moods, and I was not in the best of moods when my wife called. And she said, there's this job opportunity back home in Missouri. And she's a lawyer as well, and unlike me, she graduated first in her class from law school. I did not. And she had clerked for the highest courts in both Missouri and New York. I did not. And she was asked to interview to lead the profession back in Missouri. Now, my wife stands all at 5'2", and she looked even younger than she was at the time. She's got blonde hair. And I did a quick Archie Bunker calculation, and I said, you can go ahead and apply. Not thinking that she'd get the job, but I'd get all the husband points in the world. And 4 weeks later, I find out I'm moving to Missouri. There are no delis in the middle of Missouri, I have to tell you. But the negotiation, if you're a lawyer, you start negotiating at that point. I've already committed to going, and so I didn't have a lot of room to leverage. And I said, okay, fine, if we move to Missouri, I am not working. I am going to stay at home. I'm going to watch Dr. Phil. I'm going to learn how to play coupon poker with the others in the neighborhood. That's what I'm doing. Well, I did that for 3 months, and unlike the Empire State, Missouri is a very, very small place. There are not a lot of raw number of individuals who occupy the positions of influence at the top. And my wife, having one of those positions of influence, started to have conversations about what I previously did in New York, and in about 3 weeks, with no effort whatsoever, I'm back in the Capitol as Deputy General Counsel for the Governor. That would never happen here. So I served as Deputy General Counsel for Governor Nixon in Missouri for about 3 years. And then, if you recall, there was a tragedy in Missouri. There was a terrible half-mile tornado wide that ripped through a town called Joplin. They say it's a city, we'd call it a town. And there were some missteps, and I was asked to, in the aftermath of Joplin, to go lead this Missouri State Emergency Management Agency, which I did for some time. But the last job that I had was I was running the Missouri State Public Defender System, and unlike here, where you have both a county-based prosecutor and a county-based public defender system, there it's a statewide department, like our Department of Transportation, the Department of Education. And it was 600 employees, 45 offices, and a $50 million budget. And I did that for about 5 years. That was my prior experience. So I have a lot of experience with personnel, I have a lot of experience with management, and I have a lot of experience with budgets. Not so much nonprofits. That was my wife's background. Well, we made the family choice with our son in the 8th grade that if we were going to move back east and find a deli or a diner, which I haven't seen in about 9-10 years, we were going to do it now, because you do not remove your kids in high school, I'm told. So we started looking around. Now, going back to when I worked in the New York State Capitol, you don't get out very much. It's a pretty intense work environment. But on the days that I was able to escape for a little bit, my place of refuge, my place of solace, where I escaped to, was the park, was the Adirondack Park. And I'm a trail runner for 30 some odd years, and if I had just a few hours, if I had a rare entire weekend, that's what I did. And so when we're having this conversation at the dinner table about moving before my son gets into high school, we said, wouldn't it be amazing if we pivoted in our careers, if we took the skill sets that we developed over the last 15 years and found a way to marry it with our personal passion. And then this job opportunity popped up. And I couldn't believe it. And so, in just a few short months, I'm back home, and I'm just absolutely delighted. And so my first day was November 11th. It's been about 4 months, and a lot has gone on. We both good and bad. First, you never want to come into an organization at the beginning of the legislative cycle or the budget cycle, but you're absolutely tied to the Capitol. But that's what I did, and that's been a challenge, but it's also been very exciting, and I'll go into a little bit about that. But I've also been very involved with chapters since I've been here, and Tom has joined me on this as well. I went on a New Year's Day hike with the Mid-Hudson chapter. We went to the winter outing in Tug Hill. I visited with the Albany chapter, the Glensville, Saratoga chapter, the Iroquois chapter. Just recently, last week, they held a great presentation. And now I'm very delighted to be with you all here today. But like I said, the majority of my time has been in the Capitol. I was able to attend Governor Cuomo's executive budget presentation. And if anyone was there or watched it live streamed or have seen it since, you knew that he led with environmental protection funding. It was the first thing in his budget. It was very, very exciting. Okay? And so you can imagine myself on behalf of the ADK and other like-minded groups, we just couldn't wait to get out of there so we can start taking meetings on the following items. Save Mother Nature Bond Act, proposed by the governor to counterbalance what is going on in Washington, D.C., rolling back initiatives, also to position New York at the forefront of combating the effects of global warming, building resiliency for things like floods throughout the states. Now, this is a bond act. This is an unbelievable opportunity, $3 billion. Now, it has to pass the legislature before it goes on the ballots. You vote on this. This is not direct taxpayer funding. These are bond initiatives. Okay? The problem was when we met with the governor's staff on this, they didn't have any projects, they didn't have any specifics on what precisely would be funded. Now they asked me and other groups to go advocate on behalf of the governor's initiative to the legislature, because as I said, the legislature has to fund this, has to approve it first. We felt ill-equipped to do this because we didn't have any specifics. And we are been pressuring the governor's staff to start talking about specifics, what projects would be funded or could be funded under such a bond initiative before we throw our full-throated support behind it. With that pressure, the governor's senior staff has been on a tour of the state. A tour of the state to discuss and to raise support for this bond initiative. Now, there's a lot of things that could potentially be funded with this. There's a lot of things that can't be funded with it because of the nature of it being a bond act. Now, I'm going to guess that there's no bond attorneys in the room. Maybe there are. Any bond attorneys? Well, in order for something to be bondable, it has to outlast the life of the bond. That's one of the key legal components. We were very disheartened, some would say slightly angered, to hear that bond counsel's opinion was that sustainable trail building was not a bondable activity. Okay? We know from our professional trail crews that when you build a trail correctly, it most certainly outlast the length of a bond. This has become a point of continued contention. We will continue to apply pressure to the governor's staff to make sure that we get a determination by bond counsel that trail construction is a bondable activity. Okay? We see this, and this was covered in the Adirondack Explorer as of yesterday, we see this as a real opportunity, if they get their interpretations correct, to address, at least in part, the critical high use issue facing the high peaks. Okay? This is $3 billion being proposed. They cannot seriously propose this without having a tie-in to addressing high peaks overuse. So I will just say that. The other issue, the other funding initiative that the governor talked about, second thing in his presentation, was the Environmental Protection Act. Okay? When this was passed, the goal was always to get it to $500 million. This has been our hallmark piece of legislation in New York for protecting the environment with environmental protection initiatives that can be used by nonprofits, by counties, and by smaller municipalities. It is a difficult budget year, and by that I mean a $6 billion deficit that is tied inextricably to Medicaid funding. We were delighted in that context that the governor's proposed funding for the EPF remained at $300 million, the same that it was the year prior. That was on the positive side. The negative side, which we learned quickly after leaving the presentation once we got into the details of the bill, was two things. One, there were zero dedicated dollars for stewardship in the high peaks. Okay? It was not dedicated. None of the money was dedicated. Could it go to Long Island? Conceivably. We just don't know. The other thing was there was language in the budget bill that the Department of Environmental Conservation could use EPF dollars to offset the cost of their own staff. What does that mean? That instead of having to use DEC department budget to fund staff, they could just take from the EPF. So we knew right then and there that that $300 million amount was not a real funding level, because we didn't know whether the DEC, whether they could take $1 million, $2 million, $10 million, $30 million to fund their staff with. It was open-ended. Now, when Basil Sagos, the commissioner of DEC, testified in the budget, he was asked point blank by legislators, do you need more staff? Now, everyone on the dais in the legislature knew darn well that the DEC needs more staff. All you have to do is look at all the projects that are in the queue to realize that they need more staff. So it was a little unnerving when Commissioner Sagos said, no, we're good. Then why, pray tell, do you need this language in the budget that allows you to rob and steal from the EPF to fund your department? It doesn't make any sense. And so one of our legislative fights, in addition to getting funding for the Save Mother Nature Bond Act with specifics on projects, and getting the EPF funded at $300 million, is to ensure that the language that allows the DEC commissioner to take from the EPF for his own departmental functions is eliminated. These are one of the things that we're working on a daily basis. Other things, we've had about 5 lobby days. I know several of you attended some of these. I'll just go through them. We've had our first ever Adirondack Park lobby day. It was a great success. We had a tremendous response. even amongst staffers. And we're going to talk about our challenge as an organization, bringing in youthful members, more youth into the organization. But I will tell you that the interest is there, because it became almost comical. The fourth meeting, the staffer said, "Oh, I'm in the middle of doing the Fire Tower Challenge," or immediately engaged us in some other challenge that they're involved with in the High Peaks. And so the interest is there. And we have incredible support on both sides of the political aisle for the park and for many of these initiatives. So that is a positive thing. I will talk about two other. We had a Catskill Park Day, we had an EPF Lobby Day, but I will highlight just two because I don't think they're getting as much attention. Adirondack Park Agency, okay? The governor, in conjunction with Senator Betty Little, have really operated a APA that is not firing on all cylinders, to say it politely. It is almost entirely made up of local government representatives. And if you know the constitutional language on the APA, it is not supposed to be balanced, as many things are. It's supposed to lean toward protection of the park. But even then, we still do not have the full complement of backgrounds that will allow the APA to do its job in the fullest. And so the ADK, in connection with other like-minded organizations, are advocating for a full slate, not cherry-picked one person here or there that's put before the Senate. The governor tried that last year and was shot down by the Senate, but a full slate of candidates that represent the full complement of backgrounds so that the APA can do its job. What I mean by that is a land use planner, an environmental attorney. These are the scientists. These are the backgrounds. These are the experiences that we want on the APA. Okay. The Senate knows this, and the Senate is going to fight to keep cherry-picked political loyalists from getting on the APA. So that's a major initiative, and we will certainly address that again after the budget is done. The other thing, and I don't think this is getting enough attention because I don't think it's as sexy as a $3 billion bond act or a $300 million EPF, and that's the issue of ticks. Having grown up in the lower Hudson Valley, I knew about ticks and Lyme disease and have not been far from Lyme, Connecticut, going back to the late 80s, early 90s. And it was relegated to that part of the state. Now it's an absolute statewide issue, and it's not necessarily a wilderness issue, it's a backyard issue, it's a parking lot issue, and it's certainly now an Adirondack issue. Paul Smith's college has been tracking as best they can ticks in the North Country and have found, disturbingly, that 85% of the ticks that are tracked are carrying Lyme. In addition, the prevalence in the North Country of ticks has increased some unbelievable number that I've heard astronomical accounts like 200 times in just the last 13 years. Now, we're all being confronted with different challenges in the backcountry, and ADK, in large part, is committed to helping people get outdoors safely and responsibly. And we are the only North Country organization talking about tick education, tick research, prevention of Lyme, treatment of Lyme. We've joined forces with Paul Smith's College, Cornell Cooperative Extension, and a few other downstate entities such as Carey Institute in Dutchess County to ask for a simple $1.5 million to go to these three institutions to help with education, to help with treatment research, and to help with prevention initiatives. We've got a little support in the legislature. Not a dime is included in the governor's budget, and so we are doing this full push on our own. No other organizations are doing this, but we are committed to it. This is going to be a multi-year effort, but we do not want the narrative to become it's unsafe to go outside. And right now, New York State does not have a plan to combat ticks, and ADK feels like we should make it a big part of our push to ensure that they do. So there's a number of other things that are not budget related, and I won't spend too much time on them, but there's a task force bill that's set up to try to reduce the impact of excessive road salt to protect the ecology of our waterways. That bill has a lot of promise this year, particularly since it's a Betty Little bill, and this is her last year. We're really hoping to get this done for her, get it across the finish line. Also, there's the invasive species transport law bill. We all know about the boat wash stations. Okay, they're very nice. We all see them. They're largely ignored. Nobody's washing their boat, and it's just like security at the airport. If they were voluntary, how many people would use it? Not too many. And so we need to strengthen the invasive species transport law. There's also a few constitutional amendments we're working on. I'm up at Horta negotiating with the DEC on some use permit, restrictive use permitting, so that they can do what they've been doing for decades up at Mount Van Hoevenberg. And we're interested in getting a lot of land put back into the forest preserve if they want to continue to do a lot of what they've been doing up there. So we're working on that. But I want to spend a little bit of time talking about and applauding the governor for standing up the High Peak Strategic Planning Advisory Group. Now, that's not a group that rolls off the tongue, and it doesn't work well as an acronym, but what it lacks in the name, it makes up for in its function. It's to look at data, it's to look at comprehensive solutions to high use and the high peaks. And the Adirondack Mountain Club sits on this High Peak Strategic Planning Advisory Group. They've been meeting twice a month for about 2 months now, and the plan is to get some ideas, some concrete options proposed to the DEC by June. Now, I don't know whether they'll meet their deadline, but there's been a little bit of push and forth, back and forth on the issue of permitting brought up by some other groups. Now, when this came up, I got it right in front of our Conservation Committee. Our Conservation Committee plays an advisory role to the Executive Committee. We want their counsel on what position the ADK should take on this. So if you have a position as a chapter, I want you to know that they are deliberating in preparation for their May meeting to adopt a position. Now, staff's role in this, I feel, is to provide some sort of counsel to the Conservation Committee before they make their recommendations. And I have done so, and I will happily share with you what my position and what the position of staff is as it relates to permitting. There are so many investments that can be made in the high peaks that can help spread people out. We know where people are going. We know where they're not going. And where they're not going, in our estimation, far exceeds the number of places that they are going. And so there could be both, and there's no shortage of money, I can tell you that, just from seeing the $3 billion bond proposal with a $300 million EPF. Money does not seem to be an issue, but the money is not tracking the problem because there's not the dedicated funding for front country infrastructure, for parking lots and bathrooms, or from spreading people out with visitor centers in other towns like Old Forge and Tupper Lake. And even other towns farther west, like Lyons Falls, where I spent a lot of time at the confluence of the Black and the Moose Rivers. There's all kinds of opportunities to spread people around, and the ADK staff, because our parking lot is constantly full, we play a role in this, and we told the state that we are well poised to assist you in that endeavor. We know a lot of people come to our trailheads, many of them on their first hike, and we have a captive audience. And they're going to get a great experience, but they may not get a true wilderness experience because of how populated it is. And so we, as part of our outreach efforts, along with the rangers, share with them other opportunities. But we feel like we're doing this in large part on our own. The state could quadruple our efforts in education and help spread people out throughout the high peaks by promoting other hikes, not necessarily high peak hikes, and also allow the dollars to go towards building sustainable trail and repairing trails. We do not see that investment, that dedicated investment right now, and what the staff counsel to the committee has been is, while we are not absolutist, we have no religious objections as of yet to permitting. Much like going to war, it should be a last resort. And so we hope that those other investments are made, the educational outreach is done, and the last component, because up until now we have operated almost entirely on hyperbole and anecdote, we need objective data collection. There is permitting in certain parks in the country, but they have all been preceded by robust data collection efforts. And before we fast forward to permitting, we want to make sure that objective data is collected to inform our decisions, but before we make a leap towards keeping people out. And I will add one other position that I hold that is cynical and is reflective of all my years in state government. And that is this. It's not surprising to me at this point how many of these things start off as relatively innocuous. Oh, it would be a free permitting system. Just sign up online, we'll shoot you an email, no harm. And then 2 years later, what's $2, right? And then all of a sudden permitting at more locations and it's $10. And then, oh, you want to keep the rangers around while the state wants to merge them with the environmental conservation officers, you want to keep them around? Well, we need permitting dollars to dedicate to fund the rangers because they're really expensive, they come with a lot of equipment. And so I'm very nervous about the slippery slope argument when it comes to permitting. And so I want to ensure, and I'm sure there's other viewpoints here and I'm happy to entertain them, I want to make sure that all is done in the other areas of education and investment before we get there. And that's a nice segue into one of the present day issues facing ADK, and that is the fact that for as long as anyone can remember, we've always received the DEC Trails contract, okay, to help, because we, out of DEC's own mouth, we stretch taxpayer dollars the farthest by doing the most trail for each dollar. But we do not currently have the DEC Trails contract, and there's two primary reasons for that. One, the state comptroller does not like, and I share this view as a concerned citizen, in single source contracts. The government cannot just pick their favorite and fund it. There has to be competitive bidding. Now, there was no other real game in town for quite a while. We were it. But there were some smaller private trail operations. And I have no problem, given how professional and capable our trail crew is, competing for a contract, so that's not the issue at all. The issue is tied to prevailing wage. Not that it exists, but they don't have classifications at the Department of Labor for trail workers. And so did they create them? No. They just borrowed from existing Department of Transportation classifications and said, these are the ones we'll go with. This is close enough. And so they don't recognize the profession of trail building. They say, well, it's more like a carpenter or a stonemason, which means that we would have to pay under the contract $39 an hour, $43 an hour, and because you have to front the money and get reimbursed by the state on the back end, it would come very close, if not bankrupt, our organization in order to fulfill the trails contract. So this is a big hot mess. And so I will be addressing this with the Department of Labor. We will be putting the appropriate pressure on them to come up with classifications for trail workers that are not masons or carpenters. And we are very happy then, once those classifications are established, to compete with anyone for this trails contract. In the meantime, we are not giving up on our trails program, not in the least. We will be looking for other funding sources, and we've already done so, to raise money for our trails program. The second thing of substance I want to talk about that's facing the club right now, some of you may know about this, some of you may not, and that is a lawsuit brought by Protect the Adirondacks against the DEC as it relates to cutting trees for the creation of Level 2 connector snowmobile trails. I will not, by show of hands, how many people are familiar with this so I can alter my, maybe 20% of you. Well, the DEC endeavored to start cutting down trees to create snowmobile trails in the park. And I won't go into the background on the negotiated arrangement that was made between different groups going back some time. But for the municipalities, for the local governments, their end of the deal was snowmobile trails. Well, when DEC started connecting them, Protect sued. We did not get involved. Protect was carrying the water on trying to keep snowmobiles out of the park. We didn't get involved. The problem was the definition of the protected tree as it relates to the park, or timber, has long been a 3-inch diameter standard. So when it comes to removing trees from the park, we're only looking at trees as those 3-inch in diameter or larger. This, in prior court decisions, struck the balance between protecting the wildness of the park while also allowing groups such as ours to build trails. Now, we don't cut indiscriminately, not like snowmobile groups where they just kind of plow anything in their path. We're much more discriminate. But occasionally you have to remove a larger tree, but mostly it's smaller trees, saplings, what have you. And the appellate court got a little over its skis and said that trees, or even timber, is not exclusively tied to this 3-inch standard, but could be any tree, because in their decision, even a mature tree can be just a 1-inch. And so they were not factoring in things that can get blow down, etc. But the decision, the effect of the decision, put in serious jeopardy and has since operated as a moratorium on trail building, because it changed that 3-inch standard. So now that case is before the state's highest court, the Court of Appeals. New York, it's a little strange that our lowest level court's the Supreme Court, the highest Court of Appeals, we won't get into that. But our executive committee voted in the last meeting to give staff the permission to engage in an amicus brief. Now, amicus, short for amicus curiae, which means friend of the court. That means you're not a party to the lawsuit, but you're weighing in because you're impacted in some way. And so we will be proceeding amicus curiae in this case in order to provide the Court of Appeals with rationale that would encourage them to go back to the 3-inch standard that strikes the balance between protecting the wildness of the park and allowing us to build trails. Some of you know the history of the club better than I do, and you will know that in 1921, the idea was formed to give people access to the park by building trails. We do a lot of things now, and I'll get into some of those things later, but the very first thing we did, and the thing that has sustained us for nearly 100 years, has been trail building. So I can't tell you how critical this case is for giving people access to the park and for allowing us to continue to do what we do. Now, the other thing that I will talk about is, on my first day on the job, I learned that we were undertaking a strategic plan. Now, some of you have heard about it. It's been referenced to, I believe, in the Adirondack. And the group that was hired to do this was really second to none. It's Shelley Bischoff's group, Environmental Impact, out of Denver. If you look her up on her website, you will see an unbelievable resume, not only consulting for nonprofits, but nonprofits specifically tied to outdoors and the environment. So she was more than well qualified, and as preparation for the strategic plan, and maybe some of you have been involved, she conducted more than 60 interviews with members of the organization, chapters, donors, Board of Governors, and also staff. And then we did a 2-day intensive strategic planning session with a committee comprised of many of those same individuals. And we are now at the point where she is going to be presenting her findings to the board at its next meeting, which is in the 3rd week of March. So if this presentation occurred just 3 weeks later, I could lay out all the stuff that's been included in the strategic plan, but we're a few weeks shy, and I do not want to get ahead of it, but I'm okay talking about some of the obstacles that have been identified by Shelley as part of this process, and I don't think any of it's going to come as much of a surprise to many of you. One of the issues that we're facing is our organization, I don't remember the specific percentage, but I remember the note saying that 65 or 70% of the members of this organization are over 65 years of age. Now, it's not in a vacuum a bad thing, but it certainly forces us to address the issue of what's our plan? What's our plan? Now, this issue is not unique to this organization. Certainly, if anyone has studied Alexis de Tocqueville, he once famously remarked that of all the nations, Americans are the most fraternal, meaning that we are among the most likely to join organizations. That was once true of us. But if you ask a Knight of Columbus, a member of the Elks Lodge, or any other fraternal order, they are all facing the same issue. Declining memberships, aging memberships. But among those groups, I am most hopeful about our prospects for a number of reasons. One, young people care about the environment, okay? Some of you recall a protest such as it is in New York City that happened almost impromptu a couple months ago. 50, 60, 70,000 people showed up, mostly young people. They care about the environment. The things that I'm talking about, the Save Mother Nature Bond Act, the Environmental Protection Fund, the effects of global warming, warming temperatures, prevalence of ticks, these are all things that young people care about. The other thing is getting outdoors. There's a robust counterculture among young people in response to sedentarism and electronics, where young people are getting outdoors in record numbers. It's been spiking for the last couple of years. Part of that is the counterculture. Part of that is the number of activities that allow people to get outdoors. Rock climbing, paddleboarding, snowshoeing, all kinds of things. And so this organization has primarily been about organized group hiking that's inextricably twined with its history. My rough sketches of a proposal or an initiative moving forward, if we are going to attract young people who are interested in the environment, interested in getting outdoors, have no interest whatsoever in coming to meetings, okay? We are going to have to increase both in number and breadth the type of outdoor pursuits that we embrace. All of which, I should say, should be human-powered, okay? But even under that broad umbrella of human-powered activity, okay, there is rock climbing, which I know is, heresy, because it violates our tried and true commitment to our insurance provider. I know that lands with some of you, others may not. I should use this opportunity to depart a little bit from my predecessor, who I thought had no equal in the state of New York when it comes to advocacy. No one was more knowledgeable or a better advocate at protecting the Adirondack Park and all of New York State than he was. But I think there was a little overcaution when it came to lawsuits or insurance. I do not share that. Okay, we are not a crocheting club, we are an alpine club. Okay? And we should not be wagged by the tail of the dog that is insurance companies. And I had a very frank conversation with our insurance carrier, who is an absolute gentleman, and I told him the type of club that this will be. And we will be doing rock climbing, and we will be doing we will be doing scrambling and stand-up paddleboarding and all kinds of other things, and dare I say trail running and all kinds of other things. Because no matter where I go, everyone comes to this organization for a different reason. We all love the outdoors, but we love it for different reasons. Different things brought us outdoor. Maybe it's a love of birding, maybe it's a love of hiking and solace, maybe it's camaraderie, maybe it's protecting the environment. Okay? We need to broaden our tent, not shrink it. I will be looking for the types of legal solutions we need and insurance solutions so that we can be the club that we want to be. So if there's an endeavor that you want to do not hesitate to bring it to me. I will look at it first as how can we make this happen, and only say no when I've exhausted all the possible options. But that's the mindset that I will be operating from. So I'm back off of that segment. The other thing that is a challenge, and I can say that I've recognized this in the first week, and maybe many of you may not have recognized this, but a lot of you are tied into other nonprofits. Okay? I've been a board member at the Ronald McDonald House for a number of years. I've been tied into Big Brothers Big Sisters. And one thing that a lot of nonprofits, dare I say most nonprofits, have in common is that they do one thing and they do it exceptionally well. Maybe groups like the Red Cross do a few other things, but primarily it's they do it one thing and they do it exceptionally well. We're a little different, and it creates a challenge for us. Okay? We do outings, we promote and have chapters, we also run a lodge. We now run a restaurant, both inside the lodge and the Hungry Hiker. We run a magazine. We have 10 to 11 additional publications that we put out each year. We have an advocacy operation. We educate more than 500 fourth graders each and every year. We do water testing at major leagues. I can go on and on about the number of things that we do, which makes us a unique organization and a wonderful organization. But by looking at the books and looking at the number of people we have to carry out these initiatives, I have to tell you, I'd rather get A's in 3 or 4 areas than C minuses in 6 or 7 areas. I think one of the observations as part of the strategic plan, and one of my immediate observations, is that we do far too many things, and as a result, we do not have the resources to do all of them exceptionally well. And so we will be looking at opportunities to build in areas that are the meat and potatoes of this organization, and separate ourselves from things that have been holding us back. And that's the analysis that we need from the consultant on the strategic plan. We need someone to look at this from a dispassionate viewpoint, from someone who did not come to the organization for a specific reason, for someone who's not emotionally tied to the organization. We need someone to tell us, quite frankly, something we may already know, and give us the cover and the support to make some of those tough decisions. And one of the things that we're facing is, and I can tell you because I'm at all the tables, we have a real opportunity here that others don't. There is no shortage of pure environmental advocacy organizations in New York State. You can't swing a dead cat without hitting 20 of them, okay? Even within the Adirondack Park alone. My wife said to me the other day, she's like, what's the difference between this group and I said, I have no idea. I have no idea. But we have a huge education component. We always have. We've been about building trails. We've been about getting people access to this wonderful park. I've been using this analogy and no one stopped me, so I will just continue it here. You know, some groups believe that the way to protect the Mona Lisa is to put tape around it and put it in the basement so no one can get access to it. I don't think that's our viewpoint. I think the way to protect the thing that we care about, this wonderful park, is to get people access to it and teach them how to care for it. And I think that's what separates us from these organizations. So I think the educational component, I think that should be the thing that drives us from an advocacy standpoint. So I'll just leave it there. But I'm more than happy to come back, if you'll have me, and talk about the strategic plan, whatever direction we take. Okay. There's 10 to 12 million people that visit the Adirondack Park every year. Now, if you just listen to the rhetoric, you would think that that was a bad thing. Oh no, we have to turn them away, we have to send them back. What I would like to see, because right now we have tremendous educators, and I just encourage you, I can't encourage you enough, to get up to Heart Lake and not just visit the lodge, but go meet the staff, see them teach 4th grade classes, see them interact with hikers. They are incredible. We are not reaching a large enough market share of people who are visiting the park. We need to increase our market share to increase our impact on hikers, on students who are coming to the park. That's where our opportunity lies. And so a big part of what we can do to grow the organization, I feel, is inextricably tied to education. So there's opportunities there. Right now we find ourselves turning away school groups who are interested, who have heard about us, but we don't have the capacity. And as many of you know, they're officed above the Adirondack Lodge in these little cubby little offices, 2 and 3 people to an office. Imagine if we had a state-of-the-art education center, wherever it is, with tiered seatings, all the technology, office space for staff, a fisherman in residence, a an alpinist in residence, teaching kids, interacting with hikers, think of the impact we can have. But there's only so much that we can do at Heart Lake. It's a 6 million acre park, okay? If we are going to be true partners in this discussion about spreading out use, we need to endeavor, in my humble opinion, in making all efforts to spread people out by making investments as an organization in other areas of the park, so that we don't have to teach people just at Heart Lake, that we can have a club presence, a physical presence, with trainers, with educators in other parts of the park. Who knows, if we're clever enough, maybe those areas can be connected by trail to the Adirondack Lodge or JBL. So we can create this unbelievable network, education, hamlet to hut type of experience, connecting different properties and spreading out use throughout the park. These are ways that we can lead by example. These are ways that we can distinguish ourselves as an organization from others. And we should not wait around and just interject in discussions that are already taking place. The best way to lead on this is to identify our path forward and just go in that direction and let everyone else respond to it. We cannot sit around and wait for the state to make the correct decision to support policies with dollars. We have to do our own, but to lead by example, particularly when it comes to the high use issue. So I don't know how long I've spent. Did I hit my hour mark?
You can ask the questions.
I'm happy to dodge your questions right now. Yes.
I don't know the full scope, but it's my understanding that the governor has an amendment that he slipped into this budget process that eliminates citizen input, data collection, and scientific research on energy development in the whole state. So if you have a section of, let's say, Lake Ontario front, a company can go in, propose wind power or other related power, and that can get passed through much faster because they're no longer looking at citizen participation and citizen.
I see what you're saying.
Has that been presented? Because everything you're talking about sounds great, but it's after the budget is passed, and from the birding groups I belong to, there's an outcry about a lot of energy-related development, and I could see some of that coming into the Adirondack forest area, that people are looking at some of those preserved lands, wanting to make them energy efficient, but there's no citizen input.
Sure, so I can talk about this. I'm not expert on it. I can talk about it roughly. You're talking about site select. The governor is proposing that the state shorten the amount of time that gets energy projects implemented. And right now, per the governor's budget proposal, the problem is it takes too long, a couple of years, for site selection to take place. So he says, no, we will swoop in, the state will, and identify sites on the front end, and that will move these projects faster. And of course, everyone claps because no one's read the fine print yet. But what you're saying is that fast tracking eliminates public input on the front end. Is that correct?
Yes. So there's a lot of concern that things are going to be pushed through on an organizational level, on an inside track, where local residents may not even be aware of what's happening in development where they live.
We will,
and so on.
We will take a look at that. We have not. We've been focused on all the other hidden gems in the other parts of the budget. But thank you for bringing that to my attention.
If the budget goes through and that amendment is in, then it will tie hands later on.
One of the dangerous things about the budget is, and one of the few things that I liked about the way that my old state of Missouri did it, is you could not do policy as part of the budget, okay? Because you could have a very attractive budget that the legislature is poised to pass, but there's some policy choices in there that kind of the governor's allowed to shove down everyone's throat. So it's a real dangerous thing doing policy in the budget. The problem is can you get the legislature who are staring at those dollars to remove it from the budget? And right now the discussion with respect to the Bond Act that I talked about is separating that out from the budget so that we can get more specifics and more knowns as it relates to the project. So we have not been as up to speed on the NYSERDA initiatives, and we will be. So thank you very much for bringing that to my attention.
Maybe that isn't within the realm of ADK, but it's still something about, as a group,
yes,
we want to protect those areas that we want to use, so it's going to be a fine line.
Yes, I agree with you. Thank you. Any other questions? Come on, there's got to be more than one.
Yes, welcome. I'm Jerry Fletcher.
Hi,
Very
Jerry.
glad to have you here and hear some refreshing perspective. I'm a life member of the ADK. For about 12 years, I led twice a year trips up to the High Peak. And I know I'm not the only one who has a concern that I'm about to express, but I'm very glad you're here bringing a fresh perspective in so many ways. We talked about the bonding being a multi-step process and not being direct taxpayer, not being a direct
Right.
taxpayer. The Constitutional Convention is the same thing, but every time the question of constitutional amendment comes up, the main club has had a knee-jerk reaction to say, no, we have to protect this. There are a number of issues, including the courts, whether convicted legislators should have their pension or not. There are a number of them. And we have a very serious problem with the court system that need to be addressed by a constitutional convention and amendment. I certainly am concerned about the park, and I enjoy it. But when you look at what's going to happen in the multi-step process, one, it's not just the convention says here we're going to do it. It's a multi-step process, as you pointed out with the bonds. It's just not going to happen. If you take the 5 biggest cities of the state, New York, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Yonkers, well, let's throw in Brooklyn, you know, it's just, and Ithaca, too. It's just not going to pass that the park will be impaired or interfered with. So I think that we should not have a knee-jerk reaction as a club.
So I just want to make sure I understand whether we're talking about a constitutional convention, constitutional amendments generally, or a specific constitutional amendment. Are you saying that we shouldn't get involved?
I think we need to be more strategic and thoughtful, whether it's a constitutional convention in or out of the convention process, and not simply have a knee-jerk reaction that, oh, the park is going to be at risk. I'm also a supporter of the Catskills Center, which was founded and created by friends of mine in the Catskills. So these two places are very dear to me, but I don't have a knee-jerk concern that just because we have a constitutional amendment or convention that the park is going to be threatened. And I wish the main club would get off that track. I'm very happy that you're bringing a fresh perspective.
Can we have, because I want to get a better understanding, when you say we don't need to do it here, when you say knee-jerk, in which direction? So
of opposing taking a look at the Constitution and putting it out there to the citizenry for a vote, putting it out there to a convention that may or may not be political. It has to go through that, and then it has to be approved by 2 legislators and be on the ballot. It's such a long process that anything that's ridiculous, irrational, and going to be threatening to the park is just not going to happen.
Okay.
But the club has had a knee-jerk reaction to say, no, we're not going to do that. We're afraid the Adirondack Park is going to be at risk. And I say rubbish.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Yes.
What are your thoughts on the use of Meetup? Because we've got Meetup.
Is that the app?
Yes. It's an app, but we've got very conflicting messages from the parent club in the past, and it's something that we want to investigate. A couple of chapters are currently doing. So I'm kind of curious if you have any thoughts on it.
So I don't have mature thoughts in that we haven't met on it, but the issue of apps have come up, and it seems like we come at it from different angles. And what I mean by that is, you know, if we're going to, there's different perspectives. I'll give you a few of them. If we're going to attempt to attract younger individuals, how do we ignore the use of apps? That's one. Two, the counter argument to that is, isn't there a danger in overemphasizing apps when we're trying to prepare people for the backcountry, and if they over-rely on electronics, that will fail them, and then they're not prepared. So trying to live in that world between the two is difficult. So that's kind of just kind of an overarching perspective. But as it relates to the specifics of Meetup, I've never used it, but I've heard of it.
I'll talk to you more about
Great.
it offline.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm very interested to know the thought of how to appeal to younger, grow this group with more younger.
Yeah.
During your visit to other chapters,
Yes.
they have some interesting ways.
No, I think they're facing the same challenges you do. The question was, you know, what specific strategies are we going to employ to attract new members? One, I'll give you three. By the time I get through them, there may only be two, there may be four. Who knows where this will go? One, we cannot think of interacting with people purely as members, okay? It doesn't have to be only a membership relationship. The club's history is you pay a certain amount, you're a member, you get the magazine, you get these benefits. That's our relationship. And if you don't do that, we don't have a relationship with you. There are other ways to have a relationship with somebody. I'll give you a great example of how one of the first things that allowed me to interact with the need to build sustainable trails. I mentioned before, I'm a trail runner for 30-something years, okay? The Mohawk Preserve, you mentioned the Catskills, and down in the Gunks, the preserve has members, just like we do, okay? But in addition, they put on outdoor events that attracts 500 to 700 people per event that are not members. They put on a 50-mile trail race, which, God save me, I'm going to be doing in May. And they have 2 other running races throughout the year. Now people, I looked at the entire roster for who comes to these events. It ranged in age from 8 to 68. And the geography that it covered went far beyond the boundaries of New York State. So they're hitting everybody just by bringing them there for a common activity that they love. And running is the most popular activity, outdoor activity in America right now. While they're there, the Mohawk Preserve is talking to them about how to take care of the beautiful place where they're about to run. And they have raised in excess of $1 million so far putting on this event. I paid a $100 entrance fee and have been required to raise $300 additional to be a part of this run. It can be done. We can bring in people, we can make contact with people and tell them about the organization without them being a member. And that's perfectly okay. Okay? The other strategy that I would suggest, and I talked a little bit about it at dinner tonight, where I live, it happens to be Saratoga County, I use social media to get involved online with every other outdoor organization in my county, so I know what they're up to. And they're doing things, they might be a running group, they might be a climbing group, but in order to sustain their group, they're doing other activities. The running group in my area just scheduled a paddling activity for June, right? Hey, that's right in our strike zone, right? And so I reached out to the president of the club saying, can I come speak at a meeting and talk to people about the club? There is natural synergy there with other people who join outdoor organizations who may not know about us. And so that's a second opportunity, okay? And you know. Third, I think we're doing it, and that is investing in youth, okay? The decline in participation of groups like the Scouts and other groups have created a real void, okay? And we are committed, and I think we should be doing a lot more of it, educating fourth graders, but I would like to build a curriculum that stays with them from fourth grade all the way as they matriculate through high school, because your impact, when you just see someone once in the fourth grade, may not be long lasting. Maybe you get at a few kids who go home and talk to their parents, hey, let's go on a hike together, I learned about this, or let's start the Fire Tower Challenge. But if you are able to see that student every year until they graduate, you are building a steward for life. And so they're much more likely to appreciate the park and join the organization if you make those long-lasting investments. So those are just 3 strategies taken from different angles that we can do, that I'm committed to doing, to kind of making that connection with the younger people who don't like to come to meetings and who don't like to join things, but do care about the environment and love getting outdoors. In the back.
I asked about drones.
Drones?
Yeah, so I perceive more technology in the Adirondacks, and drones are, in my mind, intrusive.
Yeah.
You know, it negatively affects my experience in the Adirondack High Peaks. We've had some, you know, news about drones on top of some of the high peaks, and I'm just wondering what the current policy is and what your strategies are.
So I think we did some drone photography on the cover of the latest issue of the Adirondack magazine, and I think there's a pretty lengthy article on drones in the high peaks in there. If you haven't seen that, I would point you to that. A much more robust answer than I'm going to be able to give you. But we have a no drone policy at Heart Lake. That's a good place to start, I think. And we are making people aware through that article, and we'll be taking other means to share with them the legalities of where you can launch from and where you can't launch from. But I've been talking to staff who was very smart on the Leave No Trace program about whether a no drone component can fit into the Leave No Trace program, because it does take away from people's enjoyment of the wilderness, and it certainly impinges on the aesthetics and the experience. And so I think the majority of people, I would hasten to say, are with you in that it does deteriorate from the experience. Drone law, I can tell you from a legal standpoint, the law is not keeping up with the usage, and so this will be a quickly evolving issue. I think it's a great topic for the Conservation Committee to lay out a policy position that can be taken to the executive committee and ultimately the board on where ADK stands on it. So I'm happy to take that issue back. Yes.
So I know you talked a little bit about the education and work that's done in Heart Lake and special programs for kids, and I appreciate that the facility isn't the size or amenable to expanding that there. Has there been any conversation about taking it on the road? There's so many chapters around New York State with some of the folks who do the teaching at Heart Lake be willing to go to different chapter locations and having an event and teaching in an outdoor part.
If the education director, Seth Jones, was in the audience, you would hear him thundering towards me to grab the microphone, because he'd say, yes, 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 3 times yes.
Okay.
In fact, when we initially proposed the idea of an education center, his response was, no, we should have a traveling education team. That's near and dear to his heart, because we want to reach people. And should we wait and rely on people coming to the park? No. So we are trying to do the financials on what that would cost. Obviously, as someone that runs an organization, travel expenses, that hits budgets hard. And so you really need someone to not just invest in it, but you need some way to sustain this. But I can tell you that in the meantime, until we're able to go down this road, and I don't think it's mutually exclusive with an education center, heck, let's do both. Let's at least go down that pathway. We are doing other things by partnering. For instance, last week I met with the education team met with the new diversity director of the Adirondacks. Her and I were both born in the Bronx, and she has started an initiative to bring kids from the Bronx up to the Adirondacks for 2 weeks at the end of June. And so we will be partnering with her to provide an educational component to that visit for those students. And until we're able to get funding for travel teams, etc., we're going to try to partner and leverage the initiatives of other organizations to do that. In the meantime, if you have something that you would like one of us to speak on, reach out. We all the time get requests for high schools, elementary schools, outside the park, and we try to work it out where someone can attend and present, so we'll try to figure it out. We don't have a goal.
Thank you, Michael, for coming and talking to us tonight. I just want to thank you all for being here.